Before we dive into today's terrifying tale, make sure to hit that like button and subscribe to my channel. Don't forget to click the bell icon so you never miss a spine-chilling story. Let's get into it.
The house next door.
After the divorce, I needed a fresh start. I found a quaint house on the outskirts of Seattle, in a peaceful, small-town neighborhood. The house was everything I wanted. Charming, affordable, and nestled on a quiet street. It seemed like the perfect place to begin again. The only oddity was the house next door. From the moment I saw it, something felt off. The windows were boarded up, and the lawn was an overgrown mess. It looked like it had been abandoned for years. Despite its eerie appearance, I tried to brush it off. I had enough on my plate without worrying about the state of a neighboring property. As the days turned into weeks, however, the unsettling nature of that house began to weigh on me. At first, it was just the occasional creak or thump that I dismissed as the old house settling. But as night fell and darkness crept in, the noises became more frequent and harder to ignore. They weren't just random sounds anymore. They felt deliberate, as if someone or something was moving around next door. The quiet street that had once seemed so serene now felt oppressive. Each night, the noises grew more persistent, filling the stillness with an unsettling rhythm. I started to feel like I wasn't alone, like something was watching me from beyond those boarded-up windows. I tried to convince myself it was just my imagination, but the creeping anxiety refused to let me rest. I was beginning to wonder if my fresh start had just turned into another nightmare. The strange noises next door continued to plague my nights, and my curiosity grew along with my anxiety. One afternoon, I decided to ask my neighbors about the abandoned house. I hoped to gain some insight or at least find reassurance that I wasn't overreacting. When I brought up the topic, the reaction was immediate and uncomfortable. Their faces fell, and they shifted uncomfortably, as if I had touched a nerve. They were reluctant to say much, their eyes darting away. One elderly woman, however, finally broke the silence. Her voice was low and trembling as she told me that the house had been abandoned for years after a tragedy that no one wanted to discuss. Her words only fueled my curiosity. I couldn't let it go. That evening, I sat down at my computer and started digging into the history of the house. What I uncovered was deeply unsettling. Years ago, a family had lived there, a couple with 2 young children. According to old news articles, they had vanished without a trace. The case had gone cold, and the house had been left empty ever since. Despite its vacant state, the noises I was hearing suggested that something, or someone, was still very much present. The more I read, the more I felt a gnawing sense of dread. The house wasn't just abandoned, it was a mystery, and it seemed to be reaching out to me in ways I couldn't fully understand. The shadows next door felt alive, and I was starting to wonder if my new beginning was about to turn into something far more sinister. The noises next door had reached a point where I could no longer ignore them. My curiosity and unease drove me to take action. That night, with my heart pounding and adrenaline coursing through my veins, I decided to investigate the abandoned house next door. Armed with a flashlight and my phone, I slipped through the broken gate and made my way to the front door, which creaked open with a reluctant groan. The darkness inside was thick and suffocating, filled with the musty odor of decay. Dust-covered furniture and cobwebs greeted me, creating a surreal and eerie atmosphere. I moved cautiously through the house, the beam of my flashlight cutting through the oppressive gloom. Every step I took seemed to amplify the silence, making the house feel even more menacing. The feeling of being watched was overwhelming, and I had to keep reminding myself that I was alone. Upstairs, I found a locked door in one of the bedrooms. My hands trembled as I forced it open, the old lock snapping with a harsh sound that echoed through the stillness. Inside, the room was frozen in time. Everything was exactly as it had been when the family disappeared. Dust-covered toys, faded photographs, and furniture that seemed to hold whispers of the past. But the most chilling discovery was a series of old photographs scattered across the floor. As I picked them up, my breath caught in my throat. Each photo depicted a shadowy figure lurking outside my own house, peering in through the windows. The realization hit me like a ton of bricks. Whatever was haunting the abandoned house next door had been watching me all along. The fear that had been creeping up on me was now a full-blown terror. After the horrifying discovery in the abandoned house, I tried to convince myself that it was all just an elaborate prank or that my mind was playing tricks on me. I desperately wanted to believe that there was a logical explanation, something that would dismiss the dread that had begun to consume me. But the reality of what I had seen was too disturbing to ignore. The noises next door grew louder, more aggressive. I could hear banging, scratching, and occasional whispers that made my skin crawl. Sleep eluded me, and my nights were plagued by vivid nightmares. In these dreams, I was trapped in the house, reliving the moments before the family's disappearance. Every scream, every shadow seemed more real than the last. I would wake up in a cold sweat, my heart racing as if I had just lived through a nightmare. The more I pieced together the events from those dreams, the clearer it became that the family hadn't just vanished. They had been taken by something malevolent and ancient that still lurked within the walls of that forsaken house. This realization was paralyzing. It wasn't just their memories that haunted me, it was the presence of whatever had claimed them. Then, one night, the terror reached its peak. I awoke to find muddy footprints leading from my front door to the foot of my bed. My breath caught in my throat as I followed the trail with my flashlight. The footprints were unmistakably fresh, and they led directly to where I was sleeping. My eyes darted around the room, searching for some sign of the intruder, but there was nothing. That's when I saw it, a message scratched into the wall above my bed. Asterisk, you're next. Asterisk, the words seemed to vibrate with a sinister energy, and a cold shiver ran down my spine. I realized with horrifying clarity that whatever had haunted that house next door had now turned its gaze upon me. The sense of safety I once had was shattered, replaced by an all-encompassing fear. I was no longer just a witness to a haunting. I was its next victim. Desperate to escape the terror that had consumed my life, I decided it was time to leave the neighborhood for good. I packed my belongings with trembling hands, eager to put as much distance between myself and the nightmare next door. But the house seemed to have other plans. On my last night, the horror escalated to an unbearable crescendo. The once faint noises transformed into a cacophony of chaos. Doors slammed open and shut with bone-rattling force, windows shattered, and the walls seemed to close in on me as if the house itself was alive and intent on keeping me trapped. My heart raced, and panic set in as I realized that there was no escaping this nightmare unless I confronted whatever was tormenting me. Summoning every ounce of courage I had left, I made the fateful decision to return to the abandoned house one final time. My flashlight trembled in my grip as I crept through the darkness, back to the locked room. The house groaned and rattled around me, as if protesting my intrusion. With a burst of resolve, I forced open the door once more. The room was just as I remembered, frozen in time, but the atmosphere was now thick with an oppressive presence. Shadows writhed on the walls, and the temperature plummeted, making my breath visible in the air. There, in the center of the room, I faced the entity that had claimed the family and was now coming for me. It was a grotesque amalgamation of darkness and malice, a twisted, shadowy figure that seemed to pulse with a hunger that defied description. The sheer terror of the moment was beyond anything I could have imagined. As the entity moved toward me, I screamed in abject fear, but my cries were swallowed by the darkness. The room seemed to close in on me, the walls bending and shifting as if the house was consuming me. The final moments were a blur of terror and darkness. As the entity reached out, the last thing I saw was the empty, waiting eyes of the house next door, ready to claim its next tenant. The story ends with the haunting implication that the evil had claimed another victim, leaving the house next door still waiting for its next inhabitant to fall prey to its malevolent grasp.
The Misconnection.
I was finally settling down for the evening, the exhaustion of a long workday making the prospect of a quiet night at home incredibly appealing. I flopped onto the couch, its worn cushions creaking beneath me, and reached for the TV remote. The room was dimly lit by the soft glow of the lamp on the coffee table, casting long shadows on the walls. The hum of the TV was soothing, a steady background noise that promised to lull me into a sense of calm. Just as I was starting to unwind, my phone erupted with an insistent ring, piercing through the cozy silence. I glanced at the screen. An unknown number was flashing in bright, unsettling contrast against the darkness of my living room. With a sigh of annoyance, I picked up the receiver, ready to brush off what I assumed would be another irritating telemarketing call. "Hello," I said, my tone clipped. Instead of a voice, I was met with a barrage of static. It crackled and popped with an intensity that almost made me pull the phone away from my ear. Amidst the white noise, I thought I heard something else. Faint, almost imperceptible whispers, weaving in and out of the static like ghosts trying to make themselves heard. The whispers were too distorted to decipher, but the eerie quality of the sound sent a shiver down my spine. I ended the call, shaking my head and trying to convince myself it was just a glitch or a wrong number. But then it happened again. The same number appeared on my screen, and the same unsettling static and whispers filled my ear. Each time, the experience left me more on edge. The static seemed to pulse with a malevolent energy, and the whispers grew more insistent, more unsettling. I started to dread the ring of my phone, the once familiar sound now a harbinger of creeping unease. Despite my efforts to ignore it, the calls kept coming, each one like an unwelcome guest that wouldn't leave. The sense of irritation gradually gave way to a gnawing curiosity mixed with a deepening sense of dread. Who was on the other end of that line, and why were they trying so persistently to reach me? The static and whispers became a persistent, haunting echo in my life, and I found myself drawn into a troubling mystery that I wasn't sure I wanted to unravel. Days turned into weeks, and the relentless calls showed no sign of stopping. My initial annoyance had slowly transformed into a consuming curiosity. I found myself obsessively waiting for the next call, hoping that it might offer some clue or explanation. Each time the phone rang, my heart would race with a mix of dread and anticipation. Determined to get to the bottom of this, I began to delve into the origins of the mysterious number. I scoured online resources, contacted my phone provider, and used every trick I knew to trace the source. My efforts, however, were in vain. Every lead turned out to be a dead end. The number seemed to exist in some shadowy void, with no clear connection to anyone or anything in my world. Then, one evening, a breakthrough came. I stumbled upon an obscure forum where someone had mentioned a similar experience with unknown, haunting calls. The poster had traced their calls to an old payphone located in a dilapidated part of the city. My heart skipped a beat as I realized that the number I had been receiving calls from was connected to the same payphone. The address was on the outskirts of town, in an area I had never visited before. It was described as a forgotten place, overrun with weeds and decay. I felt a chill run down my spine as the implications sunk in. This wasn't just some relic from the past. Someone, or something, was actively using it. The thought that the payphone was a living conduit to the static-filled whispers I had been hearing sent a wave of unease through me. The idea of a forgotten, abandoned payphone being the source of my torment felt like a cruel joke. Yet, the persistent calls and eerie whispers were very real. Driven by a mixture of fear and determination, I resolved to visit the payphone. It was clear that whatever was happening was tied to that location, and I needed to confront it, no matter how unsettling the experience might be. As I prepared to make the journey, I couldn't shake the feeling that this was only the beginning of something far darker than I had ever imagined. One chilly evening, I mustered the courage to visit the abandoned payphone. The sun was setting, casting long shadows over the deserted neighborhood, and a biting wind cut through my coat as I approached the outskirts of town. The area was as desolate as I had imagined. Crumbling buildings with broken windows, their once bright paint now peeling away, and overgrown vegetation that had claimed much of the sidewalk. It felt like stepping into a ghostly remnant of a bygone era. As I turned onto the neglected street where the payphone was said to be, my anxiety spiked. The payphone stood alone on a crumbling corner, a relic of the past, barely recognizable amidst the decay. Its metal casing was rusted, and the glass that had once protected the phone was now shattered and missing in places. The sight was both eerie and strangely compelling. I approached the payphone with a sense of foreboding, every step echoing off the empty buildings. The ground around it was littered with debris, old newspapers, broken glass, and fallen leaves. When I was close enough to touch it, I ran my fingers over the cold, rusted metal, feeling the weight of years of neglect and abandonment. As I examined the phone, something caught my eye, an old flyer stuck to the side, partially obscured by grime and cobwebs. With trembling hands, I peeled it off and wiped away the dirt. The flyer was faded and yellowed with age, but its message was clear. It was a missing person notice from decades ago, featuring a grainy photograph of a young woman with a hopeful smile. The accompanying text detailed her disappearance under mysterious circumstances. No traces left behind, no clues as to what had happened. A chill ran down my spine as I read the flyer. The connection between the payphone and this missing person was deeply disturbing. It felt like a piece of a larger puzzle that I was not prepared to solve. The flyer was a stark reminder of the darker history that clung to this place, and the unsettling realization that whatever was using the payphone might be tied to something far more sinister than I had imagined. As I stood there, the shadows lengthening and the wind howling around me, I couldn't shake the feeling that I was being watched. The payphone's grimy, shattered facade seemed to hold secrets that had been buried for too long. I knew I had to dig deeper, but the thought of what I might uncover left me feeling uneasy and on edge. Determined to get to the bottom of this, I threw myself into research. I spent hours poring over local archives, digging through old newspapers, and sifting through public records. I also reached out to longtime residents of the area, hoping they could shed light on the history of the payphone and its connection to the strange calls. After weeks of investigation, I stumbled upon a chilling revelation. Years ago, a brutal crime had occurred in this very neighborhood. A family had been savagely murdered, and the case had remained unsolved. The details were gruesome and deeply unsettling. The payphone, it turned out, had been used by one of the victims shortly before their death. It was a link between their final moments and the haunting whispers I had been receiving. The more I learned, the clearer it became that the payphone had taken on a sinister role. Local legends and old rumors suggested that the payphone had become a conduit for the dead. People spoke of it as a place where lost souls might try to reach out from beyond the grave. I had dismissed these stories as mere superstitions, but now they seemed disturbingly plausible. As I reviewed the transcripts of the old calls, I realized that the static and whispers had patterns and recurring themes. They weren't random noises, but rather an attempt to communicate something. The voices were fragmented and distorted, but I could make out occasional words and phrases that hinted at messages from beyond. It was as if the victims were trying to tell me something, a final message that had been buried by time and death. The realization hit me like a cold wave. The whispers weren't just a prank or a glitch, they were a desperate cry for help from those who had been wronged. The payphone was no longer just a relic, it was a link to a past that refused to stay buried. And now, it seemed that the spirits were reaching out through the only means they had left, trying to convey a message that had been lost in the shadows of history. With this new understanding, my sense of dread deepened. The stakes were no longer just about eerie phone calls or unexplained noises. The payphone and its connection to a horrific crime had become a gateway to something far more terrifying. Driven by a mix of fear and determination, I returned to the payphone one last time. The night was unnaturally still, the air colder than it should have been. A heavy sense of dread settled over me as I approached the rusted, forgotten relic. My hand trembled as I lifted the receiver, the static now deafening. But amidst the chaos, I could make out words, desperate pleas for help, fragments of a story long buried. The voices spoke of a family, brutally murdered, their cries echoing through time. The realization hit me like a punch to the gut. This payphone was a conduit, a bridge between the living and the tormented souls trapped in the past. As the voices grew louder, the air around me thickened with malevolence. Suddenly, a shadowy figure began to materialize from the darkness, its presence radiating pure terror. My heart raced as the figure drew closer, its intentions clear. The horror of what I had uncovered gripped me, and I knew that I was no longer just an observer. I was now a part of the story. The truth behind the payphone was far more terrifying than I could have ever imagined, and as the figure loomed over me, the night closed in, leaving me to confront a fate I couldn't escape.
The text message.
After a long day at work, I finally settled onto my worn-out couch, the soft hum of the TV providing a comforting backdrop. My small apartment in the Chicago suburbs was my sanctuary. Quiet, unassuming, just the way I liked it. As I scrolled through my phone, a text message popped up from an unknown number. Asterisk, how was your day? Asterisk. I stared at the screen for a moment, puzzled. Probably just a wrong number, I thought, and didn't bother replying. The next day, another message appeared. Asterisk, hope you got home safe. Asterisk. That's odd, I thought. It could still be a mistake, but this time it felt more personal. I dismissed it again, convincing myself it was just someone playing around. But as the days went by, the messages became more frequent. They asked about things only I would know, like, asterisk, did you enjoy your lunch break at the park? Asterisk or asterisk, that blue shirt looks good on you. Asterisk. The casualness of the texts was unnerving, but I tried to laugh it off. Maybe it was a friend with a new number, though none of them admitted to it when I asked. Deep down, I was starting to feel uneasy. Someone was watching me, someone who knew too much. But I didn't want to overthink it, so I continued to ignore the messages, hoping they'd stop. But they didn't. In the back of my mind, a small voice whispered that something wasn't right. Yet, I pushed the thought away, unwilling to let a few creepy texts disrupt my life. I should have listened to that voice. The messages didn't stop. In fact, they became more specific, more invasive. One evening, just as I was finishing dinner, my phone buzzed. The message read, asterisk spaghetti again? You really should mix it up. Asterisk. My heart skipped a beat. I hadn't posted anything about dinner or even talked to anyone that day. How could they know? The next morning, another message came through as I was heading out the door. Asterisk, running late today, aren't you? Asterisk. I froze, staring at the text. Whoever it was knew my routine, down to the minute. Panic started to creep in, my mind racing through every possibility. Was someone watching me? A neighbor, maybe? I reached out to friends, asking if they were behind this, expecting one of them to fess up. But they all seemed genuinely concerned, which only made things worse. If it wasn't them, then who was it? I tried blocking the number, hoping to regain some control. But the messages kept coming, each one from a different unknown number, each one more disturbing than the last. Asterisk, nice choice with the gray hoodie today. Asterisk. Asterisk, left the apartment at 8:15, right on time. Asterisk. My life was no longer my own. Every detail was laid bare to someone I couldn't see. Fear gnawed at me constantly. I found myself checking my phone obsessively, glancing over my shoulder, feeling watched even in the supposed safety of my own home. This was no longer a prank. This was something far more sinister, and I was trapped in it. The constant barrage of messages was driving me to the brink. I couldn't take it anymore. In a desperate attempt to regain control, I changed my phone number and updated every password I could think of, email, social media, even my bank accounts. I needed to shut out whoever was doing this. To make my apartment feel safe again, I installed a security system with cameras covering every angle, hoping to catch any sign of the stalker. For a brief moment, I felt a flicker of relief, as if I had finally taken the right steps. But that hope was shattered when a new message came through. Asterisk, Nice try. I see everything. Asterisk, my blood ran cold. How were they still reaching me? The messages didn't just continue. They grew more aggressive, more threatening. Asterisk, you can't hide from me. Asterisk, asterisk, I'm always watching. Asterisk, sleep became a luxury I could no longer afford. Every night, I lay awake, staring at the security monitor, watching for shadows that never appeared, but always feeling them lurking just out of sight. I began to suspect everyone around me. My neighbors, who once seemed friendly, now felt like potential threats. Co-workers offered concerned looks that I interpreted as guilty stares. Even strangers on the street became suspect. Any one of them could be the person tormenting me. Paranoia took root, twisting my thoughts until I couldn't trust anyone, not even myself. The feeling of being hunted consumed me. I was no longer living. I was merely surviving, waiting for the next move in a game I didn't understand. Driven to the edge by fear and paranoia, I knew I had to dig deeper. I started retracing my steps, thinking back on anything that seemed out of place, anyone who could have access to my life in such an intimate way. One memory stood out, a recent date with a woman I'd met online. She had been charming, but something about her was off. She had asked a lot of questions, far more than normal. At the time, I thought she was just being friendly, but now it felt like she was fishing for information. Convinced she might be involved, I decided to visit her apartment. I needed answers, and I was desperate enough to confront her directly. But when I arrived, the place was empty, completely abandoned. The windows were boarded up, the door hanging off its hinges as if no one had lived there for years. My heart raced as I realized I'd been lured into some sort of trap. Whoever had been sending those messages wasn't just playing a cruel joke. This was something far more sinister. As I stood there in the hallway, a cold dread settled over me. This wasn't just about someone watching me. This was about someone who had orchestrated every moment, every fear, leading me to this very point. I fled the building, my mind reeling, unsure of what to do next. That night, as I tried to calm myself, my phone buzzed again. I hesitated, my hand trembling as I picked it up. The message was a single image, a photo of me, taken from outside my apartment window. My breath caught in my throat. The realization hit me like a ton of bricks. They were right outside, close enough to see every move I made. Panic surged through me, and I knew there was no escape. Whoever this was, they weren't just watching, they were coming for me. The fear had consumed me, but now it was fueling something else, determination. I couldn't keep living like this, jumping at every shadow, fearing every unknown number. If this person wanted to play games, then I would end it on my terms. I decided to set a trap. I'd go through my usual routine, pretending to be oblivious, while secretly waiting in the dark, a baseball bat gripped tightly in my hands. The hours dragged on, every creak of the apartment making me jump, but nothing happened. I began to doubt my plan, thinking maybe the stalker had somehow seen through it. Maybe they wouldn't show. But just as I started to relax, I heard it, a faint noise coming from the bedroom. My heart pounded in my chest as I inched toward the sound, bat raised, ready to strike. But when I reached the bedroom, there was no intruder, no masked figure waiting to pounce. Instead, lying on my bed was my phone, the screen glowing in the dim light. A new message had appeared, asterisk, I'm inside, asterisk. A chill ran down my spine. Before I could even process what that meant, the lights flickered and went out, plunging the apartment into complete darkness. My breathing quickened, and I swung the bat wildly at the air, hoping to hit something, anything. But there was nothing. Just the suffocating silence and the oppressive darkness that seemed to close in around me. And then, I felt it, a presence, so close I could almost feel the breath on my neck. My mind raced, and in that terrifying moment, it all became clear. The invader had never been outside, never lurking in the shadows of my life. It had always been inside, watching me from within the walls I thought were safe. My blood turned to ice as I realized the horrifying truth. The last thing I remember is the sound of my own scream echoing through the apartment, a desperate, primal sound that was quickly swallowed by the dark. And then there was nothing.